Okay, we're talking about cell transport here. And we're talking about moving things in and out of the cell. By the way, I didn't post that last lecture yet, but I will post that, and I'll post this also. Moving things in and out of the cell through the membrane, right? Now, what I'm doing here is just kind of a brief summary of what we've been talking about in this section of the book, right, which is section 3.2, right? 3-2. 3-2 in the book, through the membrane. So we're moving things through the membrane, which obviously is very important. Cells have to get things in and out, otherwise they would die. If they were totally sealed off like a plastic bag or something, like a Ziploc bag, then they would die quickly. And they wouldn't be able to do anything either. They wouldn't be able to put anything out. So, moving things through the membrane. Now we talked about diffusion also. Diffusion happens on its own. Diffusion happens automatically. It happens spontaneously. Molecules move from where they have a higher concentration to where they have a lower concentration. That's called diffusion. You talking about facilitated diffusion? Yeah, I'm gonna get to that in just a second. Molecules move from where there is a concentration gradient. Yeah, okay. Move from where they have, yeah, good. Where they have higher concentration. I'll mention that in just a second. Higher concentration. The guy on the video talked about that. To where they have a lower concentration. Now, there's nothing magical about this. It's just random motion of molecules. That's all it is. The guy in the video does a great little demonstration. Actually, it might be in the next ones when he's talking about passive and active transport. He just dumps a bowl of like M&Ms onto the table, and they just spread out across the table. And he says that is diffusion. It's just things spreading out because they're just random motion. That's diffusion. When you walk in the door and you're totally doused in Axe, and soon everybody in the room can smell you, it's because of diffusion of those Axe molecules through the air. Just randomly moving through the air. Not entirely true, because there's movement of air in this room. So like there's convection where the air is blowing around. That's not the same thing as diffusion. In diffusion, it's the actual individual molecules just moving slowly through the air. All right? We're not talking about wind. Wind is not diffusion. Anyway, to where they have a lower concentration until they're equal. Concentration until they are equal. So you can think about diffusion. You'll be safe. When you think about diffusion and osmosis, which I'll mention in a minute, think about it as equalizing out the concentrations of everything. If it can, it's going to equalize everything out. Equally interspersed, that's when it'll stop, until the concentrations are equal. All right? Now, when the molecules are water, when the molecules are H2O and moving across a membrane, we call it osmosis. That's Mr. Bakikio roaring, I think, right? Yeah. We call it osmosis.
Where do you see you should play that Osmosis Jones movie?
I'll have to look at it. I don't know what it's about. So osmosis is called about, this is diffusion of water across a membrane, okay? Diffusion of water across a membrane. You got that? Osmosis, diffusion of water across a membrane. There's three components there: diffusion, water, and across a membrane. So not all diffusion is osmosis. Osmosis is specific, right? Happens it's in your kidneys, it happens across the cell membrane, happens in a dialysis machine. If somebody has kidney failure, they put them on this machine that does the same job as their kidneys, right? Gets stuff out of their blood and everything filtered out. Now, I forgot I was going to put in here what Darian said on this first one, so let's put a parentheses here. Stuff is moving along a concentration gradient. That guy in the video mentions a concentration gradient from high to low, right? It's going down along what we call a gradient. Just like balls roll downhill, molecules will move from where they have a high concentration to a low concentration. That's called a concentration gradient. Now, let's talk about these two terms. Passive versus active transport. Okay? Passive versus active transport. Now, in passive transport, we're talking about diffusion. Or we're talking about facilitated diffusion. We talked about facilitating things before. Facile, right? We facile. So what did we talk about facilitated before this unit? What was facilitated? Remember? Reactions were being facilitated by catalysts, right? In this case, facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion is just diffusion through pores in the membrane or through protein channels. It's just diffusion through protein channels. Now, your book doesn't mention this. Your book actually gets this wrong, but water moving through a cell membrane actually moves through channels called pores. Because water can't go through the lipid bilayer, because water doesn't mix with lipids. So water moves this way. Remember, the lipid bilayer looks like this, right? This is the cell membrane. Right? And there are channels made of proteins in here. So that the channels are basically like gates or doorways, so molecules can go through that can't pass through the lipids. Oil and water don't mix, right? So you try to put water right through those lipids. Remember, these tails right here, these molecules on the inside, they're oily. They're like fats or waxes. You can't get things like water through there. So they make channels. There's channels in the membrane of the cell. That's how the water goes through. Now there are things that will go right through those membranes. Small nonpolar molecules will go right through. So that is called facilitated diffusion, when it is facilitated by a protein channel. It's facilitated by a protein channel. But it's still just diffusion. In other words, it still happens on its own. You follow me? That's why it's called passive transport. Passive people don't really do anything, right? They just sit there. When somebody's passive-aggressive, what are they doing? They're not doing anything that's overtly aggressive towards you, right? But they're being aggressive by not doing something, basically, right? Isn't that what that means? Passive-aggressive? Sort of. So passive. Now, what's on the active side? Active transport is required to move things against the concentration gradient. To move things from low concentration to high concentration. Notice how that's backwards? See what I just said? Low concentration to high concentration. That's backwards from diffusion. So another way of saying this is against the concentration gradient. It's like rolling a ball up a hill. You gotta, it doesn't happen on its own. It's going to require energy. And of course, energy in the cell is something we're going to get into big time in a coming unit after the cells unit start talking about. Requires energy. Protein. So on the other side we had protein channels. Now we have protein pumps. You know, cells have little machines in them, folks, and they really are like little machines. I'll show you some pictures as we move on here. They've taken transmission electron micrographs of some of these proteins, and they literally, some of them look like little motors or pumps almost. So these are little pumps, and they pump things across the membrane. Let's say your cell wants to get something in it, like maybe some glucose that it doesn't have. It could pump it in there. But it takes energy to do that. So we have something called protein pumps and protein channels. Protein pumps are used to, sometimes they're used to set up a concentration gradient. And this gets pretty complicated, but we'll talk more about that later. All right, so let's go back through here. Let me just go back through and highlight the terms that we talked about. We have diffusion, right, which happens on its own, and it happens according to a concentration gradient. It goes from where it's high concentration to where there's lower concentration. We have a special case of diffusion which is called osmosis. That's when it's water that's moving and it's going across a membrane. Then we have passive and active transport. Passive transport can be just plain old diffusion, if it's something that can go right through the cell, the lipid bilayer, or it can be facilitated diffusion if it needs a protein channel to go through. Then it's called facilitated diffusion. Then we have active transport, which requires protein pumps to push stuff through the membrane. Because the reason it requires that, it's not because the molecules are too large or something. You could just make a bigger channel if that were the case. It's just because you're going against the concentration gradient, so it won't happen on its own. It'd be like this. Somebody walks in the door, totally doused in Axe. Diffusion would take that smell over to me here. If I had something like active transport, I could make those molecules go back and stick to the person again. I could go against the concentration gradient. All right? By the way, this is what that guy does at River Run Maple Syrup. I don't know what he calls it, River Run Farm or something like that. He has a reverse osmosis filter. Takes energy, and he can actually push the water out of the maple syrup using that procedure. Okay, questions about those terms? And I just realized I forgot some, and those were isotonic, hypertonic, and hypotonic. And this is it, and then I'll just introduce the cell parts, and then we'll be done. Isotonic, hypertonic, and hypotonic. Let me correct this writing. Iso, whenever you see the word iso, you're going to see it in science here and there. If you take earth science, they'll talk about isobars. Isobars are when they draw, like on a weather map, they draw a line that represents having the same pressure, air pressure, all around it. Iso means same. When you think of tonic, think of a drink. Not something you should be drinking as underage people, but you can drink tonic water, right? You can buy that at the store. So think of something you would drink, or medicines used to be called tonics, a lot of them. It's a solution. What isotonic means is same concentration. Same concentration inside and outside the cell. So when we talk about these, we're usually talking about cells here. hyper, when you think about hyper,